Hello everybody, and today I'm about to tell you yet another story about why game publishers are absolute cancer, and especially Western ones. Now, if you've been out of the loop for a while, let me explain. Western game publishers are notorious for closing development studios, treating developers like cattle, and their customers like a car dealership, where you've handed them the money, and therefore it's not their problem anymore when they sold you a terrible game. And today's subject is the 2017 video game Prey. Now, Prey's development history is pretty much everything wrong with AAA game development today, and let's talk about why this is the case here. Now, the story of Prey goes all the way back to the 90s, as in the 90s, 3D Realms, best known for games such as Duke Nukem 3D or Rise the Triad, had a game in development called Prey that was never released as developed by them. And from what I can recall, they ran into tech limitations with hardware at the time, and eventually they put the game on hold. Once game engines advanced to the point where the developers could create their ideal vision for the game, they added the game to Human Head, and they ended up creating a fun and interesting shooter on the ID Tech 4 engine that featured unique gameplay and an original setting and story. Compared to the handful of other ID Tech 4 games, it easily stood out, and many have gone as far as to say it's the best game running on that engine. Its graphics were amazing for a 2006 game, its art direction was unique, and it had some unique concepts for a first person shooter at the time, such as wall walking and jumping through portals. If Prey came out 10 years later, Kill Screen would gush over it due to the fact that it is one of the few games with not only a Native American protagonist, but they're even voiced by Native Americans. However, over time the game has kind of been forgotten about, and it's easy to see why. See, a few years ago during a Steam bundle sale, back when those were still a thing, 2K ran out of CD keys for Prey on Steam and didn't get or produce more. And due to this, it has been removed from Steam. And now the only ways you can play this game are with a retail 360 copy, buying it from the Mac App Store, or by buying a used PC copy of Prey on eBay. If this were any other game, the story would have ended here, with Prey being one of those games floating around on abandonware sites that are actually quite good that kind of fell through the cracks, or as a fun 360 game in the used bin at GameStop. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting. See, Human Head was actually developing a sequel called Prey 2 to be published by Bethesda Softworks. Now, anyone who's in the loop knows this is a big red flag, and I'll explain why. See, Bethesda is not only known for releasing buggy titles, but they're also known for treating developers like crap when they work with them, such as Obsidian with Fallout New Vegas. With New Vegas, not only was the game made in a short amount of time with less time to bug test it, but when the bugs deemed the Metacritic score, the developers were paid less for this game. Let's also not forget that ID Software wasn't completely paid for when Bethesda bought them out. Anyhow, Prey 2 got attention, and for a good reason. It actually looked interesting and stood out. The pitch was big enough to convince many gamers to actually care about it. It was about a space bounty hunter in a Blade Runner influenced setting who went around and did missions and whatnot. While it didn't look like it had too much to do with the original, besides taking place in the same universe, and with the protagonist of this game being on the plane crash that was merely a set piece in the original game to show the scale of the space station you're on and what it was sucking in. Comments from people who had worked on it stated that it was going to tie into the story of the original game, with the protagonist of Prey 1 actually making an appearance as well in it. So, what happened with Prey 2? Bethesda treated Human Head poorly, as Bethesda wanted to buy out Human Head. And when Human Head refused, Bethesda started increasing pressure on them from impossible deadlines to a contract that said they could only work on Prey 2. And eventually, development of Prey 2 stopped because the developers did not want to get bought out and Bethesda eventually handed the game over to Arcane Studios, a studio that just happens to be owned by Bethesda. Bethesda's excuse was that Prey 2 wasn't up to their quality standards, which is pretty rich when Fallout 4 and whatnot is considered acceptable by Bethesda standards. It's like Sega talking about quality standards when they've let games like Sonic 06, Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, and Aliens Colonial Marines come out. Anyhow, what did Arcane Studios do? They decided, let's make our own game instead. And they decided to make a new game with nothing to do with Prey, called Prey. Now, in AAA fashion, just like with EA's Star Wars Battlefront, it had nothing to do with Prey, besides a name and the fact that you're having to run from aliens, which has been seen so many times before. I mean, come on. Isn't that what a movie series was about? If anything, Prey is trying to ride off the hype from the unreleased Prey 2 and the reputation the first Prey had in an attempt to boost sales. While players buying Prey based on the hype for Prey 2 might be what AAA studios like Bethesda intend on happening, this translates into the direct opposite for more dedicated gamers, and especially those who had either played the first or who are waiting for Prey 2. Arcane's Prey is never going to escape the shadow of the cancelled Prey 2, or the fact they're selling an unrelated game as Prey. It's a tactic straight out of Hollywood, and nobody except talentless hack writers, lazy studio executives, and brainwashed consumers who will eat up anything and damage control anything for free while getting nothing in return like this tactic. That's the truth. To make matters worse, there was a Steam glitch that might or might not have been entirely coincidental. And I say this because in this day and age, you can't tell what is and isn't just a mere coincidence anymore. Apparently, Arcane's Prey was overriding the original Prey from 2006, and they could not be installed side by side on the same hard drive. Now, sure, this sounds more like a mistake on Valve's end than it does Arcane's, but it's a pretty symbolic glitch. A glitch that Bethesda wants to pretend the original game never happened because, it's 2017 and you should buy the new Prey at GameStop. It's like Bethesda wants to write off the name of the original title and its acclaim, and that's it. Thanks to all of these factors, Prey 2 has become one of the most disappointing recent cancellations in gaming, being right up there with Silent Hills, Star Wars 1313, Mega Man Legends 3, and Star Wars Battlefront 3 in terms of sheer disappointment mixed with hype and demand for these games. Any other publisher would have given the developer support and funded this game after seeing how promising it looked and all the hype for it, and yet Bethesda just canned it right there because they wanted to buy the developer out, and the developer said no. And no matter what Bethesda does, naming this new and unrelated game Prey instantly attaches a massive stigma to it. Like Bethesda was so desperate for sales that they decided to take an unrelated game and slap the word Prey on it in an attempt to recoup the costs of canceling a game, all because a developer refused to get bought out by them. So anyhow, now that I've talked about the big elephant in the room for 9 minutes, which is Prey's development history, let's put all of this aside now. Let's put the development history of this game aside. Let's put Prey 2 aside and the original Prey aside. And let's just focus on the 2017 Prey as a standalone game. I mean, I've seen people say that if you like forget that this game was associated with so and so, you'll actually like this game. So let's put all of this aside. Let's put the controversial development history aside. Let's put all the developer stuff aside, and let's just focus on the 2017 Prey in its own bubble, like if the original one never happened. Let's just talk about it this way because maybe it might actually be a good game. Maybe it might surprise me. So let's ask the question and answer it. Is the new 2017 Prey any good? So, when Arcane Studios developed Prey, they decided to make their own video game with the name Prey instead of doing anything the original two games did, the one that came out and the one that didn't. And well, it's essentially a clone of both older shooter RPGs such as System Shock and Deus Ex, and heavily story-driven shooters influenced by the previously mentioned games such as BioShock and the clones that came afterwards in the Xbox 360 era. However, while many BioShock clones nailed what made the original game good and did some of their own things with it, such as have a different story or change the setting entirely, this game only has some of the elements of this. Now, Prey pretty much nailed most of the elements of the Shock formula in its gameplay, and it had most of the gameplay down pat. On one hand, the controls feel a bit off, and when you run, you can't look faster whatsoever. It actually slows your look speed. However, the game does nail many other parts of the formula System Shock in later games used. You have an inventory system with larger items taking up more blocks. You start off with a wrench, just like in the Shock games. You end up in a spaceship, where everything's clearly gone wrong like in System Shock, except you're finding generic black aliens that look like bootleg head crabs instead of a sentient AI. There's crafting systems straight out of Dead Space, except for leveling up your character, and of course there is a generic crafting system, just like in every AAA game now. You get radioed messages from someone you don't see, wanting you to accomplish objectives. You can explore the game's environments and read logs on the computer and pick up audio logs, which are there to let you know what happened in the game and how everything went to crap and why you're here on this space station exactly. There's codes you can punch in with numbers like in Deus Ex. There's even a plot twist at the very end in typical Shock fashion. So what is wrong with this game? Well, simple. The game is dreadfully boring. While they nailed most of the gameplay aspects of the Shock series and clones of it, they managed to leave out what made those games fun and engaging. There's no interesting story to keep the game moving. The game starts off with a boring intro, something goes wrong, and then there's an epic plot twist. You were living inside a simulation for the last few years. You wake up, break the glass of your apartment to find out that you were living inside a soundstage, and then it goes on from there, where you basically find yourself beating the shit and shooting a lot of aliens. So you end up killing lots of aliens and stuff, I guess. Exploration, from what I played, was dull as shit, with few fights in between to make things interesting, and the setting didn't interest me like Bioshock's Rapture or Dead Space's USG Ishimura. And did I mention that unlike Bioshock, the game that many reviewers were gushing over and comparing this game to, unlike Bioshock, there's no enemy infighting. You can't have like the Big Daddy fight the people in Rapture. You just don't have that in this game. It's just you hitting aliens. That's it. I mean, many reviewers gushing over this game and calling it Bioshock in space clearly haven't played either System Shock or Dead Space, because you know what? Those games handle the whole thing a lot better than this game does. Those games keep you engaged, and this game, on the other hand, just doesn't. And now let's talk about the backstory of this game. So, apparently the backstory of this game is that JFK survived the infamous assassination attempt in 1963 that shocked the world, and he poured money into space exploration. After both the US and the USSR fought off aliens, they built a special space station to trap them. However, after an incident, they abandoned it, and another group took control of it later on. Afterwards, your goal is to stop the aliens and escape until you get to the end and realize, plot twist! The entire game was just a simulation. Congratulations, Bethesda now has your $60, and you got an ending literally on the level of Sonic 06 or Pokemon the first movie. So let's talk about the graphics. The graphics of Prey look alright, but the frame rate tanks at times, and it's locked to 30 frames per second on consoles. The game is powered by the CryEngine, however, it looks nothing really spectacular. The art direction is semi-interesting, and it caused many reviewers to instantly compare the game to Bioshock for a good reason. It has a 60s and 70s-ish aesthetic that clashes with the modern-day clean aesthetic a lot, and even some Art Deco parts. So basically, it's like a typical building in Cincinnati. You have both flat panel monitors and Windows blue screens in the same room as older computers that were clearly modeled after Google image searches for PDP-11 and old IBM mainframe. There's both new technology and things that wouldn't be out of place in a typical building in the 60s. Really, it's probably the only strong part about the game, along with the soundtrack that gets more intense when enemies are near. And that's all about all the good things I can say about this game, really. And if I can recall correctly, Portal 2 actually had a similar aesthetic for the whole locked away testing chambers, you know, the ones that were sealed off. Well, if you played Portal 2 and you remember those levels where you're running through the 1960s and 1970s ish eras that had kind of fallen into disrepair, that's what playing Prey feels like. It's like its aesthetic feels just like that. So I can't even say it's the most original thing. All in all, Prey is such a dull and boring game, and there's nothing about it that keeps me interested. You want games like this? Go buy System Shock 1 and 2. Go buy Deus Ex. Go buy Dead Space 1. Go buy even games like Singularity, and there are plenty of other games that probably have similar gameplay mechanics as well. Just don't waste $60 on this game. If you want to fall into the game stop pre-order hype, then just wait a few weeks till copies pile up at GameStop because people beat it and get tired of it. And now, perhaps most importantly of all, and the moral of the story, is that Prey sums up everything wrong with Western game publishers right now. It's a generic game that came out instead of a hyped up game tons of people wanted. It rides on the name of an older game, and chances are it will be forgotten about in a few months when gamers with a short attention span move on to the newest game marketed on GameStop Store TV. But hey, professional reviewers who can't even aim right are going to gush over it anyways and write clickbaity articles about game tips and fixes and whatnot. You know, the same thing you see with every other game that gets hyped up. What they did was cancel a promising game that actually had a good concept and replace it with a generic AAA modern reimaging of an older game, in this case System Shock. But hey, considering how 21 Pilots are a popular music group for some reason, I guess I'm out of the touch with the 20-something college student who drives a Dodge Dart demographic. I don't think 21 Pilots or the Dodge Dart are appealing, but people like them for some reason. And that's all that needs to be said.